Good morning, viewer. Welcome to our first TV USA. Here's the breaking news. New phase in war opens up as Ukraine defeats Russia in Battle of Kyiv. The Battle of Kyiv is over, with Ukraine as its victor. After nearly 40 days of fierce hostilities, by April 1st, Russian forces had withdrawn from battlefields in northern Ukraine within just days. Despite a massive effort, Russia failed to encircle the Ukrainian capital and install a blockade. After sustaining heavy losses and accomplishing none of their key goals, Russian forces retreated, but not before inflicting devastating damage to Ukrainian towns and cities and committing numerous war crimes. The political decision to give up on Kyiv reverberated around the country along with Kyiv Oblast. Russian forces in early April also left Chernihiv and Sumy Oblasts. These moves amounted to the first significant Russian defeat in its all-out war against Ukraine, but it also opened the war's new phase in which Russia will attempt to regroup to achieve narrower goals in Ukraine's east and south. The Battle of Kyiv may be over, but what comes next is the even more decisive and difficult Battle of Donbass. This fight is likely to define the war's outcome. The outcome of the operation of surround Kyiv became very clear in late March, following nearly 2 weeks of a protracted operational pause. Russian forces stationed west and northwest of Kyiv had yet to resolve serious logistical issues, particularly regarding food and fuel supplies. By mid-March, Russia was still in control of all key transport points to the northwest, including the Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel Triangle, as well as Borodyanka and even Kyiv. This afforded Russian forces an unchallenged long supply line between Belarus by way of the area around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Russia also controlled parts of the E40 highway, effectively severing key communications channels running west. The goal was clear to involve Kyiv from the west. But attempts to go further south of the E40 since mid-March made virtually no progress. East of Kyiv, Russia also continued with fierce attempts to advance along the E95 and H07 highways running from Chernihiv and Sumy, respectively. But over the first month of the war, it also failed to siege any of the two cities, despite brutal fighting and heavy bombardment. It also failed to secure firm control of its long supply lines, suffering from devastating Ukrainian attacks along highways near Ukraine's northwestern woods. Ukrainian military and paramilitary units practicing hit and run tactics masterfully targeted hostile armored power and supply convoys, effectively wreaking havoc among Russians' ranks. West of Kyiv, the Russian military was eventually bogged down in close quarter combat in dense urban terrain, where Russian air and artillery power lost its efficacy. The advancement, slow and painful, stalled as Russian forces continued to sustain losses and supply shortage. Attempts to use the operative lull to regroup and reassess its campaign near Kyiv, it appears, also resulted in nothing. Manpower shortage was also obvious. According to data collected by Ukraine, Russia had deployed nearly 20 battalion tactical groups to attack Kyiv, a well-defended city of at least 3.5 million. Beginning on March 20, Ukrainian forces both east and west of the city launched a series of counter-offensive moves that started to bring new but limited results. On March 20, Ukrainian forces liberated and gained a foothold in the town of Makariv west of Kyiv along the Zhytomyr highways. In the following, Russian positions weakened along the highway as well as in the Irpin, Hostomel, Bucha Triangle. Social media posts began circulating in Ukraine about a potential pocket in the triangle, an act of fierce revenge for the ill-fated Ukrainian defeats of 2014. According to the British Defence Ministry, after March 25, Russian forces east of Kyiv were sustaining losses and running out of supplies. The Ukrainian military is in a series of counterattacks also continued, regaining towns and villages along the Sumy highway. The Ukrainian victory in Irpin, the full liberation of which was publicly declared on March 28, was very likely a loud wake-up call for Russia. The full withdrawal started shortly following the Russian Defense Ministry announcing a drastic decreases in military activity in the Kyiv and Chernihiv direction on March 29. Contrary to expectation, units with Russia's 29th, 35th and 36th combined arms armies did not leave at least some of its forces entrenched for a long static war at key points. In late March, official statements from the British Defence Ministry still expected a new battle in the suburbs of Kyiv. But it never came. The Russian military presence in Kyiv Oblast effectively evaporated within nearly 48 years. The Russian command simply backed away from many local military gains it had fought for weeks, having secured nothing. It left Hostomel and Bucha and multiplied pieces of evidence of masses executions, torture and rape revealed as the Ukrainian military retook the city. It also left Brodanko and Ivankiv, vital transportation point. It left scores of dead bodies and many documented instances of mass pillaging, which says a lot about the invading army morale and discipline. As shortly as April 2nd, Ukraine's military raised the Ukrainian flag above the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which had been seized by Russia in the earliest hours of Russia's all-out invasion. The whole of the Kyiv Oblast was declared free of Russian forces later that day. Russia's decision was far-reaching within the next few days. Ukrainian forces also regained control of the Chernihiv Oblast, and on April 4, according to the local authorities, there were no longer any cities occupied by Russia in Sumy Oblast either. The Russian withdrawal from the north was also precipitated by successful Ukrainian counterattacks, like the one near the city of Trostanas in Sumy Oblast on March 26. Two major cities are no longer suffering from Russian attempts to isolate them in many ways. Their stubborn resistance relieved a lot of pressure from Kyiv and helped the capital city prepare for effective defense. All told, the Kremlin has given up on nearly 40% of the territories it seized after February 24. The humiliating defeat for the Russian military has very likely put more strain on morale among its troops. According to the international monitors, Russian units withdrawing from northern Ukraine have sustained serious losses or have been rendered combat ineffective. Many of them are likely to require significant re-equipping and refurbishment if they can be thrown into battle again, according to British military intelligence from April 5. According to the Institute for the Study of War, a US-based think tank, the main body of Russian forces near Kyiv completed an organized retreat covered by artillery. But Russian retrograde has been so disorderly that some pockets of Russian forces were left behind. In Sumy and Chernihiv Oblast, reports from local authorities also suggest that many of the remaining Russian pockets were cleaned up by advancing Ukrainian force. The disorder of the Russian withdrawal suggests that at least some of the units now reconcentrating in Belarus and Western Russia will remain combat ineffective for a protracted period, the ISW said on April 3rd. Russian troops attempting to refit after pulling back from around Kyiv will likely have to reconsolidate into their units, identify which soldiers are still present, sort out their equipment and assess the combat readiness, and generally reconstitute before they can even begin to receive replacement and new equipment and prepare for further combat operation. According to Ukraine's figures, as of April 2nd, up to 75 Russian battalion tactical groups were still operational. Meanwhile, up to 34 battalion tactical groups were being restored in Russia and Belarus, while 16 others were destroyed in combat. At the beginning of the all-out invasion, Russia was believed to have deployed nearly 120 to 125 battalion tactical groups against Ukraine. BN Das report for Shakti Viewers.